Okay. Now we're on to reports of committees, boards, and commissions. We have the Finance Committee giving their first report. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good evening. My name is Jack Bird. I chair the Newtown Township Finance Committee. As you mentioned, this is the first report of this relatively newly formed committee. So I wanted to therefore start with just a little bit of background. This new finance committee was formed earlier this spring. We had our initial meetings mid to late spring, so it's been a relatively short time. The charter or the mission of the committee is to serve as an advisory group to the Board of Supervisors on two fronts, one being budget analysis, the second being revenue generating opportunities, which can include many different things. The committee is formed of 6 individuals: myself, Mark Boda, Stuart Kaplan, Peg Dissinger, George Skladani, and Dick Weaver. Dennis Fisher serves as our Board of Supervisors liaison. And I just want to acknowledge the great early efforts of these individuals. We have former supervisors, we have folks who have a lot of business management experience, budget management experience, so it's an engaged group. However, I do want to point out that we don't have deep specialization in municipal finance. We're also a volunteer group of 5 or 6 individuals, so there's a limit to the capacity and capability of what we're going to be able to do relative to what we think the size of the issues and concerns are. We do, by the way, have one opening, as I think you're aware. We had one resignation, so we appreciate your help in filling that spot for us. We have been focused these past couple months over the summer on getting our arms around the current state. So we refer to our phase 1 work as current state analysis, really diving into the budget. We had a couple discussions before Kurt Ferguson moved on with him, and he gave us his download the best he could. We've examined the 2018 budget as best we could in a relatively short amount of time. Just to get to a point where we can have this discussion tonight and get some reaction and feedback from the Board of Supervisors to confirm whether we're on the right track. We want to be helpful as an advisory committee, so we want to understand that we're heading in the right direction, and also as you head into budget planning season, we wish we could have started earlier and been able to provide more input, but naturally these issues are top of mind for you over the next couple months, and we're certainly available to help and support throughout that process. As a result of the preliminary study we've done, and there's much more required just to complete current state analysis, we did submit a 5-6 page summary report that you have received. Again, there's a lot more work to be done, but that was to reflect what our views were at this point in this preliminary phase. My objective tonight is to, one, keep this brief, no more than 10 minutes or so. There's a lot of competing issues on the agenda, number 1, and number 2, as I've mentioned several times, we're just getting started in some respects. So this is very preliminary. For example, we have not considered the audit report which was presented earlier. We just received that literally a couple days ago, and there will be good information in that to help us further. And there's several other inputs that we're going to require to have a complete current state analysis prepared. So I would urge all of us to avoid the temptation to want to dive into details on line item issues and so forth, just in the interest of time, and I'm not necessarily prepared to do that, but I certainly will take any questions you may have. Our report outlined 4 sections. Number 1, identifying fiscal issues and concerns. Number 2, what type of further benchmarking, research, and analysis we think we need to do. Number 3, what are the sort of high-level implications of what we have observed so far? And lastly, some preliminary high-level recommendations to consider. So I'm mostly going to touch on, the what we were calling the fiscal issues and concerns, none of which I think are new to you, but there are several members of the board who are new, so this is also meant to serve as a level set for some of you. So first off, as you know, there's a multi-year pattern of deficit spending. The 2018 budget, and this is the original budget, not necessarily where we stand today, but the budget coming into 2018 had $12 million of operating expenses with $11.6 million of revenue, so that was a $400,000 gap. In addition to that, there was a $600,000 capital spending amount that would have come from the reserve fund or the general fund, meaning it's about a $1 million deficit on a $12 million budget. I'm really generalizing and rounding here just to kind of make the point about where we are current state. And that reserve fund, or the general fund as it's often referred to, was at $2.9 million, and that was projected to decline to $1.9 million, and that was at much higher levels in years past. So that's number one. Obviously, there's some concern about the level of the general fund. I was interested to hear the audit presentation saying that we're above a safe harbor limit. That's something we would like to look into further. If that's the case, fine. We have had some different information that suggested the safe harbor is more like 30-40% of your operating budget. So that's an example, something that we want to get good, independent, objective benchmarking information from the state and other municipalities as to what is a sort of target healthy level for the general reserve fund. Obviously, as that fund becomes less, there's implications on liquidity, and there's implications on bond ratings, and that could increase interest expense over time, so it's something to be very cognizant of. The other issue that was also pointed out earlier, there are some existing revenue sources that have vulnerabilities. We all know the earned income tax is the overwhelming majority source of revenue to the township, and the resident part of that has been relatively stable, although without significant growth when you look over a 3 to 5 year period. The non-resident EIT, again, as was pointed out earlier, is a concern. You made the example, Chairman Calabro, that if Lower Makefield, for example, were to implement its own earned income tax, that's over $400,000 of revenue that would vanish from the Newtown Township budget, and that's a pretty significant number.
Hopefully they're not watching tonight.
We've seen, someone that we know now works over there, so we've seen that happening with other neighboring townships, so it's something to be aware of. Also, things like township fee income, what the township gets in revenue, which is a significant portion of the budget, licenses, permits, transfer taxes on real estate. They're susceptible to economic downturns, and we're not here to predict an economic downturn, but we have had a relatively robust period for many, many years, and I think a fiscally wise township would be planning for the possibility of turns in the economy. So there are vulnerabilities like that to revenue sources. In addition, there's some significant upward pressures on the expense side, just normal cost of living adjustments for salaries of staff and all the public service, new contracts for police and fire, capital equipment needs. Another very important point that many of you are aware of is the debt service on the township building. There's $9 to $10 million of outstanding debt. The current millage that's allocated to that debt service fund, that amount will no longer meet the principal and income payments within, possibly actually as of 2019, but certainly by 2020. And because of the way that debt was structured, there's also what I'll call balloon payments that start in the year, I think 2023, and that obligation increases dramatically, 4 to 5 times what it currently is. So that's something that obviously needs to be planned for, whether it's another type of refinancing or whether it's finding revenue sources that are going to prepare the township to meet those demands. There's other pressures on expenses, such as potentially mandated capital expenditures. For example, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is suggesting stormwater regulatory requirements that are not currently in the plan. And there's ongoing infrastructure needs such as road paving and so forth that some would suggest we're not necessarily meeting the service levels that all townships should be. So those are examples of upward pressures on the expense side. We also recognize that a lot of focus and attention goes into the annual budgeting process. We think that there's a need to think more in 3 to 5 year horizons and really focus on multi-year planning in addition to bottom-up budgeting, as opposed to the amount of focus that is put on the annual budgeting process. We really believe that on the expense side, it would be wise to analyze staffing, productivity, and whether or not there is any potential for cost efficiencies. I will say up front that our committee's feeling, and this is simply an early working hypothesis, is that there's not necessarily a lot to be found in terms of cutting expenses, but that does not mean that we should not benchmark, especially the major items of expenses. We believe, again, this is just an early hypothesis, we believe this is much more of a revenue issue than it is, there's a lot of fat to be cut out of the expense side. But that's work that we're recommending be done so that we have an objective position on that. We certainly, as we form this committee and as we stand here today, we know that there will be a need to pursue revenue enhancement opportunities. That will be some combination of growing the tax-based revenue through forms of economic development and or new creative non-tax sources of revenue and or grants and or targeted tax increases. So that's a phase of work that should occur, going forward, having focus on those revenue enhancement opportunities. And then, the other issue that we just want to highlight is we really want to encourage you to build public awareness and education around these issues within the township. We're learning that there's a lot of misinterpretation, a lot of misinformation about, for example, how little of real estate taxes actually come to the township, and the overwhelming majority of taxes go to school board and county and the like. It's not well understood. I think the public is going to need to engage more deeply into the financial issues of this township as time goes by. So that's the sort of story at a very summary level of what we've observed by our initial work. I'll just touch real quickly on some of the implications which are probably obvious. Some of this is verbatim from our report. We believe that the township is approaching a fiscal challenge that's caused by insufficient revenue generation, systemic deficit spending, expected continuing reductions in existing revenue streams, and increases in expenditures. We're not here to sound any alarms. We're not here to say that there's an impending crisis. However, we are here to say that some serious and significant work needs to be done, much more in a multi-year planning horizon, to avoid what could actually become a crisis at some point in the future. Without adequately addressing these issues in the near future, the township is heading potentially for some real financial challenges that would require significant reduction in public services and or major tax increases, neither of which will be supported by the general public. Comprehensively addressing these financial issues will require the Board of Supervisors to make significant changes to its annual planning and budgeting process, and also working with us, helping the committee to understand how to determine how best to approach and organize around all the issues, all the initiatives that we think will be required to put Newtown Township on a very healthy fiscal path. Our report is meant to serve as a level set, as a wake-up call, and I say that not to imply that you're not familiar with these challenges, but not all the public is, and to really better define the ongoing fiscal problems and begin taking actions as the 2019 budget is being developed. And again, to reiterate, lastly, a successful resolution of this fiscal predicament will require the education, input, and support of township residents and businesses. So, looking forward, we want to help the Board of Supervisors in the township to provide effective and fiscally responsible municipal services in a manner that promotes a high standard of community life commensurate with what Newtown Township expects and deserves. Our committee stands ready to support and facilitate, but the task, as I mentioned earlier, is far larger and requires much more specialized help than a small group of volunteers can provide. So that's about all I had in terms of a summary. I'm interested if there's any immediate reaction. Are we heading in the right direction based on what you were hoping to achieve from forming this committee earlier this year? And the last thing I'll mention is Peg Dissinger did make contact with the Pennsylvania Department of Community Affairs and Economic Development. They have a very interesting potential grant match that may get at exactly what we believe we need. It's called a strategic financial planning grant. That is money that's potentially available to support consulting and specialized services for exactly the types of things that Newtown Township wants to address. So we are just now diving into that deeper. That may be an opportunity, and we'll work with Dennis to inform you further on whether that is a formal recommendation or not. That's all I had.
Thanks, Jack. No, I think your report was pretty much spot on. I would like to see at least a 5-year plan. Instead of going year by year and hearing the same things over and over again. In regards to some of the issues, naturally the EIT we have to figure, and just assume that other townships and boroughs are going to institute, because they're going to need money, and that's the one way to derive money in a crunch like that. So just assuming that we are going to lose that $400,000, I think we got to have some sort of buffer to make that up. On the transfer tax, I think pretty soon we're almost built out. So we're going to see transfer tax on resales as opposed to new properties. So I guess we have to estimate what's going to happen when we are built out. We only have a few large properties left that can be built, and what's going to happen when that takes effect. The other thing in regards to business development, I would maybe get together with Micah or Kurt in regards to our business commons, or whatever they call it nowadays, which has a lot of empty space. I mean, I was jokingly saying to entice a business from New Jersey, but if we have the capability of doing so, I mean, we're in a prime location between Philadelphia and Princeton. I would like to see us promote it more. I mean, geez, Ben Salem has big billboards on Street Road and 2nd Street Pike and so on. Why can't we do the same thing on 95 and promote business to come to Newtown? And I always say, thinking outside the box. There's a lot of ways to derive income, of which can seem oddball in a sense, but if it brings revenue to the township, and it's something that the committee can come up with and give us a report on, I think we're willing to look at anything and everything in regards to that. Sure, I mean, not 95% of our budget is personnel, and how much personnel can we cut before it hampers the services, the protection of this township, and the quality of life. So I'm not throwing. I hope I'm not throwing a lot out of you, but you asked what my thought is, and I think if we could come up with a 5-year plan, maybe start with a 2-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, but I don't think we're projecting that far out into the future, and we're just keep putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, and we're we want to stop the bleeding and make everything come to fruition and keep this a vibrant town, which I think it will be and can continue to be. But I think creativity has to come into thought here. So I think, again, you're spot on. You depressed me a little bit, but that's okay. I want you to feel that you come to us and tell us the facts and the truth, because that's what we need to know. We can't put our heads in the sand and think everything's going to just appear rosy. So, any other board members have anything to
As
say?
liaison, I've been to one meeting since I was appointed as liaison to your committee. So I was just thinking, going forward, how can we kind of build this into the structure of getting the finance committee's input on a regular basis. I'm assuming I think I saw it on the schedule, that there's a work session coming up that we'll be doing some budget presentations.
Yeah, the budget presentation will be on the work session in October.
Yeah, it will be heavily into the budget starting in October. So,
yes.
I mean, if you want to keep in contact with Micah and Kurt, I think that would be something ongoing until the end of the year, actually, on this case. But with other things, if you can, take into consideration. But right now, the budget's going to take up a lot of our time and concern.
But then looking ahead to 2020, 2021, as you say, the longer term plan.
And that's where we would like to put our focus. Like I said, we're going to only be able to provide limited input or help as you work through the 2019 budget in the next couple of months. We'll help to the extent we can, but I think the real value that this advisory committee can provide is looking more in the 2 to 4, 3 to 5 year time horizon, and start some of these other initiatives of finding new revenue opportunities and just further study. So,
given the relative short time frame in terms of impacting the budget, one of the other things I found interesting about your report is your emphasis on resident education. I mean, maybe that's something the committee can get some more ideas on in the interim while we're doing the budget, so you can start that phase of what you think is necessary. We might be able to do something in terms of educating the public, I think.
we are planning to do that, and so you can expect some ideas or suggestions to come.